Hello, all, and welcome for another session of the Black Girl's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds podcast. In fact, this is the first session of this podcast. I am your host, Najma Smalls. I am super delighted to have this very important conversation today, and I have a very important guest that decided to join me in chat for the first inaugural session. He is none other than my husband, my best friend, everybody's favorite pastor, Shaman Smalls. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak life, not only with you, but to folks who will be listening today. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Smalls, honey. So we're going to cover a wide range of topics today. And if you know Shaman and I, you know that there is not many topics that's off the table for us. We're pretty much an open, vulnerable book. And our goal is simply with the hopes that people who are listening heal, right? We are not perfect. We don't have it all together. We've made mistakes in our lives, but we've learned from those mistakes. And so we are here to pass those nuggets of wisdom that we've gained along the way to you all. All right. So we're going to just jump right into it. So, Shaman, you and I, we grew up. First of all, let me tell everyone we've been married almost 20 years. And let me tell y'all, it's just been by the grace of God, right? It hasn't always been easy. For those that are married, no, it hasn't always been easy. One of the things that I think is interesting about us is that we grew up on very different sides of the tracks, so to speak. So I'm from a small town in South Carolina called Rock Hill. Shout out to everybody out there listening from Rock Hill. So it's a small southern town, one of those towns where everybody, at least back then, everybody knew everybody, right? Most of us were all family, or our families were close. Where Shaman, on the other hand, he grew up in DC. He grew up in one of the roughest parts of DC at that time, Trinidad, Northeast, which is now, it's not like that anymore. It's all gentrified. So, Shaman, with that being said, tell us what life was like for you as a kid growing up.
So it was pretty interesting. I think for me, you had to become creative and adapt to your environment. And to paint a picture for the folks who may not know, growing up for me in the inner city was nothing but row homes with concrete pavement, sidewalks, and then a small yard that was probably a dirt patch that we called our front row. And so we would play tackle football in the middle of a concrete street, or sometimes we would go into an alleyway, basically take the spokes out of a bike rim and make that our basketball hoop with whatever piece of board we can find just laying around. And so for us, we just were very creative. We spent most of our time outside, but we also had to be watchful of our surroundings because there were incidents where we would be beefing, not necessarily myself, but just our neighborhood would get into it with other neighborhoods. So, in essence, we became targets because we were affiliated with the neighborhood where I grew up. So, in essence, I just had to be mindful that when the street lights came on, it was time for me to go in the house. And obviously, it was definitely a drain to be able to go in the house as soon as the street lights came on because at the same time, the sun was out. But in essence, that was my parents' way of keeping us safe and protected because they wanted us to be able to see a future. And many of my contemporaries at the time weren't able to live out their dreams and their aspirations because they might have been killed or they got into street hustling or in the situations that caused them to either be incarcerated or, in essence, buried. So for me, it was just a time of being creative, learning to deal with a broken home because at that time, growing up, my mom and my dad had gotten divorced. I was probably between the ages of 6 and 9. I can't remember exactly when. But for me, it was just looking through the lens of how do I be the best child for my parents, or in that time, my single parent mom. And for me, I wanted to do as much as I could to take the weight off of her because it seemed like she was stressful about different things from the lights to the water bill to the security of the home. So I tried to make it my business to live up to and follow what she asked of me so that way I could take one thing off of her plate.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to also let everyone know that you grew up when DC was probably at its worst during the crack cocaine era. And so when you talk about the turf wars and having to be at home and what happened to some of your counterparts and so on, that's a sign of the times, right? Many of us remember the crack cocaine epidemic and how harsh it was and how it robbed us of many loved ones, whether they became addicted or whether they were incarcerated or if they were even killed. DC was considered the murder capital. And that context helps to kind of understand where he's coming from because crime was very rampant during those times. And so what will you say, where will you say you were in terms of socioeconomic status during that time?
Yeah, we were lower class. There was no doubt in my mind because most of our meals were either homemade boxed items or things that had government logos on them. So I could remember like white cans with black lettering to indicate that you didn't get that from Safeway or you didn't get that from Shoppers Food Warehouse, if I'm dating myself. So for me, it was definitely a life of trying to struggle to make a living. And for me, I wasn't struggling. I just knew that the struggle was existent just based on my reaction with my mom and then obviously spending time with my dad. So things were tough, but at the same time, like you said, it was just being creative. And to me, I think those life instances made me the positivist that I'm now because I didn't see it as half empty. I just saw it as a positive to try to figure things out. Now, in the moment, there is a phrase that I'd never want to hear people say, but it often comes up, and that's figure it out. And for me, that was something that I was always left with as a child. That's a phrase that is ingrained in me, and the fiber of the essence of the core of who Shaman is. It was figure it out because my parents didn't give the time to give me the lessons. It was, I don't have time, but you on your own need to go and figure that thing out. So if it was a math problem, if it was how to fix my Hot Wheels, how to put together my Lego set, how to play with my G.I. Joe characters, how to make friends, figure it out. And so that led me to creativity in ways that I just didn't see when I was at that age.
So y'all was po, not just poor. Sounds like y'all was po.
Yes. I can give context.
Yeah, it was interesting because I have conversations with many friends and they'll say, I didn't know, or they had no understanding of wealth when they were kids and what wealth was and what wealth wasn't, and socioeconomic status in terms of what poverty was, what it wasn't, and they'll say, we didn't know we were poor, but you clearly knew you were poor.
I'll say yes, but as a kid, you don't really understand the complexity of being poor. And so what I mean by that is for my parents to have a home, I didn't necessarily equate poverty and home ownership as poor. Because when you think about in current times, individuals who have a home, we now have deemed it house poor. So for me, I didn't see it as po as you laid it out. I just knew that we were struggling. And so the poor didn't hit me until utilities got turned off. So I remember coming home and the lights just weren't working. But the very next day, they're back on. So for me, I'm like, okay, that's an indication of poorness. The next is, I pretty much spent most of my time in the basement as a kid, and that's followed me into adulthood, as my wife would admit to as well.
Yes.
So when I spent time in the basement, now thinking back on it, one of the things that helped me to understand that po adjective that you've been using is My mom, as opposed to getting the house cleaned or refurbished, is probably the best way that or renovated. Renovated is probably the best word. We would put down newspaper in the bathroom. So just imagine it's like you go in the bathroom, a tile floor, and she's putting newspaper down because the basin for the shower would just basically spill over. And as opposed to wetting up the floor where you didn't have traction, slipping and hurting yourself, she was like, next best thing, as opposed to buying a rug or a shower mat, is to put down newspaper. And what ended up happening is over time, there was nothing, but you started to see the papers started to stack on top of one another. They never got trashed. They just started to get tackled top on top on top. And then I eventually started to see like little spores on the wall. Now I understand that's mold. But at the time, I just was like, why is there like green splatter on the wall? Thinking it was paint. But obviously, with an older mind, I can understand that when you don't take care of water and remediate, especially in cold, dark places, it turns into mold. So now, kind of thinking back, I can see that those activities of navigating life creatively, from my parents' perspective, was just trying to make ends meet and not spend more money than what was needed because those weren't really necessities. It was, hey, does the water run? Yes. Are the lights on? Yes. Do you have enough clothing to be able to wear through the week without having to recycle? Yes. Then we're kind of making it. Versus, hey, do we have enough to actually renovate a living space that we live in? Like right now, our kids are blessed and fortunate enough where they don't have to think about it. Like the reason we don't renovate their space is because they don't take care of it now. But if they were to get into a season and a space of life where they're like, hey, I'm going to take care of what you give me, then obviously we can give them a whole new bathroom remodel. But I don't want to give that to them because they're not going to take care of it. Like one of the things that stands out to me, and then I'll turn it back over to you. When we first bought Jace a PS5, so you just got to imagine this kid is like 8 or 9 years old with a $400 game system in his room. He had two controllers and a wireless dock that he could charge his controllers. The kid basically broke both of the controllers. These controllers are, mind you, $80 a pop. Like that's $160 by itself on top of the gaming system. Now, for us, when it was time to fix those, I had a conversation with Naj and just said, hey, we need to wait because he doesn't respect what we've already given him. And if we go out and we immediately fix this for him, I promise you the next controller or controllers we buy him are going to get broken. But I can say with that time of him realizing the error of his ways, he's very much so probably above and beyond taking care of the one controller that we did get him. So he doesn't throw it. I see it laid neatly on his couch or on his dresser, and he does that day or night. It no longer sits on the floor like it used to. It no longer gets thrown down in frustration. But to me, it's like when something becomes absent, you now have to become creative on your own, and you now have to appreciate when you get something. And in the same way, for me growing up, I now appreciate home ownership in a different way, and I want to make sure that I take care of and improve it where possible. So those are some of the lessons that I learned from childhood to now.
Great point. I love that you looked at some of the things that your mom had to do as being creative. It's always interesting to see how we process our childhood experiences and our adult mindset. So, growing up the way you did and all of the experiences you had, how does that shape your view of wealth and success today?
That's a tough question to answer. And the reason why I say it's a tough question to answer is growing up, I thought the strategy for wealth building was saving. But truly, you won't be able to, not in your lifetime, save your way into wealth because you're always going to have expenses. And on top of that, you're going to have inflation adding to the cost, meaning your dollar now is no longer what it's worth. And so when I look at wealth now, I had to understand that the same principles or the mindsets that my parents tried to instill in me, they were good, but they weren't great in relation to how to build wealth. So for example, when I say, how do I build wealth? I now have to look at it as not an addition and subtraction problem, right? Because that's how you manage a budget. But if you want wealth generation, you have to look at multiplication. So for me, when I'm thinking of multiplication, I'm thinking of how do I create multiple streams, not add a stream, but multiple streams to be able to generate wealth while I'm resting or not working. And so for me, it's now looking at what are my gifts that I can use tangibly to create a product, an idea, thought. So that way, when I'm not working, when I'm not thinking about it, it can still generate wealth for me. And one of the strategies that I look at now is investing. Like I spend a lot of time just looking at the stock market, looking at consumer patterns, looking at geopolitical activities to be able to say, hey, because we seem to be going into an economic downturn, what are people going to spend their money on? Obviously, home furnishings. So now I need to look at companies that create either products that lead to home furnishings or those feeders for it. And I know I'm probably boring you all with those details, but it's just looking at wealth for me in this space is now taking some of the lessons and just improving upon them because my parents didn't necessarily have wealth generation. I think it was how do we make ends meet and hopefully have some left over.
How do we make ends meet? And how do we have some left over? That's the real. Is passing down generational wealth, is that important to you?
It very much so is. And I think I look at generational wealth in two ways. The one is the obvious, which is the tangible, which is I leave you property or I leave you this monetary sum of money. And if I don't instill in you the principles around generational wealth, then you're just going to squander those things. Like right now, and you know this, Naj, I have a lot of different hobbies, fragrance and footwear. So if I was to say, hey, Bliss and Jace, which are our children, you are now going to get these items. And I never tell them how much these items are worth. Someone comes along and they realize the value of it, they'll be like, hey, I'll give you $50 for that. At this age, those kids would jump all over that. But if I explain to them that these particular shoes or these particular fragrances are rare and they command 6 times the price, then that now changes it. And so for me, when I'm now thinking about generational wealth, it's not just what can I tangibly give to them, but what is it I can intangibly, what thought, what ideas can I give to them so that way they know how to manage things better than I did. And so those are the key things that I would say lead to generational wealth for our youth.
I think that's so important because, as I always say, our parents were fresh out of segregation, fresh out of the Jim Crow era, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they were focused on survival. So they didn't have the wisdom that we have now. Many of them didn't. I'm not going to say all, but many of them didn't have wealth. They didn't have the knowledge of wealth. It was just about putting food on the table and making sure that was consistent. And so I think for our generation, it's so important that we continue to make sure that our children and the generations that come after us understand wealth, not just being passed down wealth, but understand, like you said, how to maintain wealth, how to continue to accrue wealth, and what wealth actually looks like. I feel like the burden is on our generation to make sure that we are educating those after us because our elders didn't know. God bless them, they didn't know. So can we switch the conversation for a bit?
Sure.
Do you mind if we talk about your mom?
Sure, no problem at all.
Tell us what you remember about your mom and when you noticed and what you noticed that was different about her.
Okay. So my mom earlier on in life seemed to be pretty mild-mannered. I would say looking back now, introverted and a woman who was caring to her children. So myself and my sister. And the thing that I started to see take a toll on her was probably stress and anxiety. I think what led to that was the divorce between my dad and her. And I think at that point, she probably had to take on a role that she didn't anticipate. And I think sometimes when you pull people into roles and they don't physically, mentally, or emotionally know what they're stepping into, it can create a rift or dissociation. And I think because of that, there was always a longing for validation and care that not a kid can give to a mom, but that a partner can give to another partner. And so for myself, just trying to watch her navigate life was challenging because I know that she became a lot more edgier. It wasn't in the form of like physical whoopings, like most folks say, hey, you didn't put the dishes away, whooping. You ain't pull the chicken out, whooping. Like it wasn't any of those things, but it was an internal, ugh, why didn't you get that? That was probably the outburst of what I saw. But as I got a little bit older, probably into my early teenage years, probably between 11 to 14 ish, is when I started to see her become more of a recluse. And what I mean by that is just her staying inside after work and staying to herself. I don't remember girlfriends coming by. I don't remember her going to go hang out with friends, even when we had times to go spend with my dad for a weekend, because he was a weekend dad. SZA got the song, "You Got 9 to 5s." That was dad. So he would come pick my sister and I up, and we would go spend the weekend with him. But I don't remember her sharing. And again, it could have been privacy that I don't want my kids to know this other side of mom, which could be a good or a bad thing. I think for us, we believe in transparency with contingencies, right? Like we're not going to share with them all of the inner workings of our relationship, but I think it's good for them to know dialogue of if mom and dad aren't getting along with one another on something, but then seeing the outcome that mom apologized or dad apologized so they can understand that we work through conflict, not avoid it. And so fast forward to my teenage years again, I'm looking at her now staying to herself, not really talking as much. I don't see a lot of emotion outside of maybe frustration and just isolation. So for me, I could see that there was probably depression and anxiety now cropping up that really overshadowed how she mommed us. It wasn't that she stepped back from being a mom. I think she wasn't as, when I think about the right words, and it wasn't the caring mom that I remember as a kid. I could tell that she loved me. I could tell that she cared. It was just, I want my own relationship. And I think it was, I love my kids, but I prefer the partnership also. So I think for her, it might have been, I wanted my happily ever after. And to be a single mom living in DC with two kids, now having to manage a budget and bills and try to work a 9 to 5, I think that can be overwhelming for someone when that wasn't what you envisioned growing up. And I think for her, she envisioned the picket fence with the 2.5 kids. Well, you got the two. I don't know what a point 0.5 is. But just trying to navigate that on her own, I think led to a lot of stress. And then you add in financial stress. That's just a recipe for nothing but insecurity.
I think it's interesting because you're watching your mom and in her humanity deal with her own humanity as a kid, right? And dealing with her own womanhood. And I think for all of us, many of us, we put our parents on this pedestal, right? With in our, especially as kids, where we believe there's some superhuman being. And sometimes it can be a shock to our system when we see them act out on their humanity. And particularly when life throws you a curveball or you're dealing with what you didn't expect, right? The life I think that's something we as a society and our churches and just in society in general, we don't prepare people enough how to deal with what happens when the dream that you had for your life doesn't manifest in the way in which you want. Because we tell people that, right? We tell people you can manifest this and you can have this and you can have that. But the reality of it is that ain't always the truth, right? So what do you do when you thought things were going to pan out one way and things don't tend to pan out? And I think sometimes, especially when the weight is so heavy, you turn into you go inward, right? Which it sounds like what your mom did. That was her way of coping with all of that, is to go inside herself. And so would you say your mom during that time wasn't emotionally available for you and your sister?
It's a tough question to answer because as a kid, looking back, it's hard to say that I missed something, right? I knew I had the love and the admiration of my mom because I excelled scholastically. Like I said, one of the things that I tried to do was make sure that I stayed on my P's and Q's where I didn't raise eyebrows. So I knew that I had her love and her admiration. I just knew that I wasn't able to feed her heart like a partner would. And so to me, I didn't know that as a kid, but looking back, I could see that when you there is only but so much that you can do as a kid to try to help your parent. There are things that they have to do on their own because they're grown-ups. They have to learn to build the right tools, the right resources, the right network of people so that way they can make sure that their love tank is filled with the things that they need to be able to navigate it. But for me, I just didn't notice it to say, okay, here was a moment that she was emotionally unavailable to me. Like she was physically there. And for me, I was an internalizer as well. So it wasn't like, hey, babe, I see you're internalizing too. Tell me about that. Because you got to think in early 80s, that wasn't the language of the time to ask that. Like going to therapy, no, that's what white people do. We don't do that. So for me, I'm like, this is my normal. The only thing I have to base this on is either Family Matters or Cosby Show. And neither one of those two talked about therapy or talking about your feelings. It was, how was school? Was everything good at school? How are you doing? Oh, I'm good. All right, then you're good then. Not trying to delve a level deeper to find out, like emotionally, how do you feel about what your dad and I have gone through? That wasn't a conversation that we sat down and had. It was a sweeping under the rug, but it was like, hey, let me make sure you got everything you needed. And at that time, as a kid, you're pretty selfish. You're like, hey, can I get my video games? Can I get these shoes? Can I get this jersey? Cool. You give me the stuff that I need. I'm not really thinking emotionally what I'm missing.
So how would you say your mom's mental health and her absence later on, how do you think that impacted you as a husband?
I'll say I don't know if it impacted me so much as a husband. And that's not to diminish the role of a mom. I don't think she was equipped to be able to help me navigate husband. I think that's what my dad's role was. I think he did the best that he could, obviously, because he was a short lived husband. But for relating to women, let's take it from that vantage point, it was challenging because for me, you have a kid who feels awkward in his own body, who doesn't like the way that he sounds, looks, or behaves, now trying to relate to a female that he has no frame of reference for outside of mom, who's a little bit distant, and sister, who we're just rivalry. That's that sibling rivalry coming into place. So I'll say it definitely impacted my confidence and my ability to relate to women in an interpersonal way. So for me to try to have a conversation at that time, it was very much so awkward because I didn't know how to start a conversation. I didn't know how to hold a conversation or how to end one. So for me, I think those were tools that my mom could have given me to help me better relate, to make a decision on who to wife or who not to wife. And so I think that would have.
What you mean she could have made a better decision on who to wife and who not to wife?
I didn't say it in those words. I just said gave me the tools to help navigate that decision because grace and thanks be to God, like he was the one that became the replacement, no offense to my mom, to say, I am going to give you the wisdom in the absence of that woman to know Najima is the right one for you. Right. So that's where, for me, as I've shared just with my family and friends, whatever you're missing, God is going to send the replacement for. that replacement could be in your life right now, or he'll send it when it's needed. But overall, just know that you need to get to a space and place where you appreciate the replacement. And I think that's hard for people because that means the death of an idea that they so dearly hold on to. And I think that's probably a big challenge for a lot of people to say, I am willing to accept God's replacement. If you ask me would I want my mom in my life, absolutely. But I have to appreciate the replacements that he sends. And there are a host of, I don't want to misspeak, but there are a host of women that are above my age that speak life into me, that encourage me, to help me overcome that longing for my mom not being in my life at this time.
And tell everybody, just so they know, what happened with your mom.
Sure. So this is 16-year-old recollection, right? So we're probably 20 years removed from the situation, but just to walk people through, when I was a teenager, so I was probably 15 going into 16. So this is me going from my junior year of high school to my senior year of high school. At that point, my mom, she found a partner, and things escalated quickly where she decided like, hey, and I met the guy a couple times, but she and he decided, hey, we're going to get married and we're going to be moving from DC to Maryland. And she said, hey, I would love for you to come. We'll have a whole new home and bedroom just for you and your sister. It is up to you all what you want to do. And that was probably one of the watershed moments of my life, of now having determined, okay, do I try to figure it out? There's that word again, here on my own with friends and neighbors, or do I move with my mom in this guy that I know little about? And so for me at that time, I decided not to take that decision to move with my mom. And I think that could have been something that might have hurt her as well, that a kid chose this situation over the one with her. But a few months after that, the visits and the relationship just started to become even more distant. And I don't believe it was intentional. I just think as a youngster, me going into my senior year, it was a lot of busyness on my part, of different academic things that I had to be involved with, different programs that I needed to complete, because my track was more educational. I was more achievement focused. Even though I'm like this 6'6" guy that looks like he plays basketball, no, I excelled academically and I had a lot of academic scholarships.
Are you making excuses for her?
No. I'm not going to make any excuse. I think, to me, everybody has the ability to make their own choices. And so for me as a parent, my conviction is to make sure that I am emotionally and physically available for my children. Mm-hmm. And I think for her, I might be there financially or as a supporter, but I don't necessarily need to be there physically. And I think for her, that started that distance of, I've got my partner. Because again, like you and I talk, Naj and I, we talk, we know that our kids are going to grow up and they're going to move away. And I think for her, I'm raising this young man to become a man, and I see his future is bright. Like I would hope she would have wanted to be a part of it, but I could tell that she saw, I don't have to worry about Shaman. Shaman has the ability to figure it out and to do well for himself. So for her not being actively engaged, definitely disappointing. But to go back to the story, the one moment where we became estranged, so now my mom and I are estranged, and this is definitely over 20 years. I didn't get the story firsthand, but I got it secondhand, and I don't know how true or factual it is, so I can't confirm nor deny what I'm about to say. But from what I understand, the relationship didn't work out. The result or the cause of it not working out was that the new husband became physically abusive to her. So much so that she eventually started to move into transitional homes and began bouncing around from different transitional homes. And I remember going to visit her at a transitional home near McPherson Square, which is a metro stop in DC. And she just looked disheveled. Like, the best way I could describe it is, you have this person with this oversized t-shirt on with a few stains. I'm not going to say it was like overly dirty, like what you would see on some people who had been on the streets for a while, but it just had a few stains on it. She had a scarf tied on her head, and she had some oversized jeans on. Now, if you look at it in today's times, that's normal for most teen kids. But at that time, when you think about a older person who is trying to figure out life, it kind of reminds you of somebody who's homeless, just being transparent about it. And I just said, "Hey, mom, like, how are you doing?" And she was just very coy. It was like, "Hey, I'm doing okay, sweetie. I love you. You know, life is going to be good. I'm going to get things together." And this is for herself personally. So for me, seeing that at 16, I don't have the wherewithal, I don't have the language, the intellect to be able to delve into it, nor do I have the financial ability to help in that situation. So I was like, let's make sure we keep in touch because you got my phone number. And so she was like, all right, babe, I'll make sure I stay in touch with you. And that was the last time that I physically saw her or even verbally had any contact with her. So that recluse became a missing person. And, you know, we're right at that cusp of cell phones, but cell phones don't have cameras on them like they do now to be able to say this or that. And at the time, my dad didn't keep records on us. Like at the same, it's dark humor, but it would be weird for someone to be divorced from another person and still keep that other person's social or contact information. Like granted, it's my mom, but my dad is she's a whole other adult, so she needs to manage her own personal records. And to me, it would be weird if he did still have it, but at the same token, it wouldn't be because they were married. That's where we were. And so right now we're in a space of time where we are estranged. She's a missing person. I don't have very many pictures of her. I don't have a social or any other identifying information that could help track her down.
Lots to unpack there, my dear husband. I want to go back. So you talked about being emotionally available. We touched on that, right? So you talked about how it was hard for you relating to or communicating with women and girls and all the things, right? So my experience growing up, like there were a lot of men around me, right? My uncles, I saw them every single day, right? And then I had my stepdad, I had my granddad. So I was never, I was familiar with guys. I knew how to converse with guys. But at the same time, there's a big difference. As I always tell women, there's a big difference between that and seeing an emotionally a healthy and solid marriage. And unfortunately, the relationship between my mom and stepdad, for a while it was healthy, and then it just turned very nasty and negative. And I had a front row seat to that. And that impacted me, how I showed up with you. And that's why it's so important what our children see and who's around them. And so when you talk about you want to make sure that you're emotionally available for your children. Talk to us about what that actually looks like, because I don't think when I talk to some of my friends, sometimes we talk about like past mistakes we made in dating and so on. And I know without a shadow of a doubt, a big part of my mistakes was because I didn't have an emotionally available father, right? Mm-hmm. And so because I didn't have an emotionally available father, you don't know what to look for. Like you just said, right? You didn't know, you don't have a compass. And so that is one of the benefits of church for me, is that I got to see role models of what a healthy marriage looks like. And then also you look for what you're not getting, and you become comfortable also with toxicity, right? So if you have a father that's in and out of your life, and that's been acceptable, when you are dating somebody that's in and out of your life, that's familiar. So you accept that. You know what I mean? If dad wasn't there, or he half shows up, or he's not a good provider, then in your dating life, that's what you accept, because sometimes that behavior is just comfortable for you, right? So you and I have met, it's like the book, It Ends With Us. Like that's our thing for us, is like it ends with us. So what does emotionally available parenting look like for you?
Okay. So emotionally available parenting is being there in the mundane moments. Like the kids are going to pull you into the high stress situations. The mundane moments are being able to recognize who and how your kids operate and look for the breaks in the patterns, because we all have these patterns of life. And even today, if we take, for example, today, our son was acting out, right? And he's acting out because Christmas is right around the corner. He understands that physically, but to connect that emotionally was frustrating for him because he now has to wait. And so for him, I had to ask a question of, you have this gift. This gift is for you. This gift is going to no other child, but you're acting out and just being emotionally immature for what? And so for me to pull him out of that, I had to ask him, Jace, let's put this into time. Do you realize when Christmas is? Because that's what that gift is for. And I don't know if you noticed, but he was less emotional about it. He still wanted the toy to open it or whatever the gift was, but it shifted his whole perspective to say, you know what? Like, I get it. Christmas is here. I got so much other stuff in my room that I can now play with, and that gift will still be there because it's for me. And so, emotionally parenting is just being able to help understand where kids are in that moment and either bring them out of their funk or relate to them in their funk. Like for my daughter, she loves the tea. There are moments that I will get into the tea with her, but if I stay there and keep her there, she is going to become gossip focused and not solution oriented. And I noticed that where leaders are looking to break the status quo. And for me, that's why I say I look for the mundane, because I'm looking to break the status quo. And I think for her to relate to her, it's, hey, tea is good, but let's remember that the same way you get tea is the same way your tea can also be spilled to other people. So let's make sure that we're a change agent and not just a person who goes along to fit within what's happening. And so for me, it's just being there, and just that alone. Like, you have to be around your kids to know how to relate to them. One of the things that I'll say is, I got a quote from a person. I won't say who it is because you think he's crazy, but I think it's very profound. The more you pour, the more you can push. And the reason why that's profound to me is, you can't speak or get cachet into anyone's life until you have actually spent time with them, pouring in, right? Because once you pour in, it shows that we have connectivity. And so I can now push you into a place where you can now be propelled. And so that's where I'm very insistent on, with the time that I have or the time that I make, is to get with my kids to see what are the breaks in their patterns, so that way I can relate to them where they are.
I love that. I love that. And I think for me, we talk about emotions in this house. We don't run from emotions. I'm always asking the kids, how do you feel? How does this make you feel? I know they're probably tired of me from that, but the thing for being emotionally available is just that, like being available, being present through all of the emotions, right? Instead of, okay, you in a bad mood, I'm gonna send you all the way over here and I'm gonna go over here or whatever. It's sometimes if my daughter is tired or if she's had a rough moment, I'll just go sit there with her, sit in her room, in her space, because her room is where she feels comfortable. But I'll go to her space and just hang out until she's ready to talk. Same with my son. I'll just go sit in his space, in his room, and hang out, just there with them in the emotion, and then having empathy for them. Empathy in the sense that I'm not going to do anything that's going to embarrass them, right? Because that's not being emotionally safe for them. I want them to feel safety. They should know, if anybody else is safe, it's mom and it's dad, right? So we don't operate in fear. We don't operate in shame in this house. And one of the things that my girlfriend Belle said not too long ago is, my daughter's not allowed to be afraid of me. And I felt every inch of that. And that's how we operate. You're not allowed to be afraid of me because I'm here with you through every emotion. I'm ride or die with you. So I want to ask you a question. talking about your mom. So, and emotions, right? Being married 20 years, I won't say the first time I saw you emotional, but one of the most profound moments when I saw you very emotional is when your associate pastor, Pastor Yvette, passed away, right? Did that remind you of your mom leaving in some way? Not did Pastor Yvette remind you of your mom, but did the feelings, did some of that pour into that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
It could have. I'm not going to rule it out. I think there were a lot of different compartments or pieces that were in play with that relationship. One was just the profound respect and love and care that I have for her. And to in essence start to dream with a person can be very dangerous because you become emotionally attached to what can be. And I think what could be was a bright future for both of us, for our families, for the generational curses that we were breaking, for what she meant for our community and for our church. It definitely rocked me when she passed away and how sudden it happened. We're talking about a person who's alive and vibrant and talking about, hey, I'm going for outpatient surgery to stage 4 cancer, and in a span of a month is no longer here. So it rocked me in a way to see how quickly life can be a vapor. And I think for me, I respected and I appreciated the single mom that she was. There was no doubt in my mind how much she loved and adored her daughter, Sydney. And looking at it from that lens, I could say, yes, that could play a part. But to that same point, the type of mom Yvette wasn't necessarily the same mom that I had. And I don't want to disparage my own mom, but I think Pastor Yvette grew into a very healthy place and made sure that her daughter had exactly what she needed. For me, I think my mom was very insistent on me having the tangible things that I needed. I don't know if she was tapped in like how we are and how sensitive we are in a good way to the emotional needs or the emotional wholeness of a person. So when I lost Pastor Yvette, for me, it hit me because it was a person who had become family. Now, I'll say she was instrumental in how I coached and how I became a better leader because I really pushed because I wanted to see her achieve greatness and to see her response to my pushings. It just showed me that we had a lot of great potential. And for me, I was very emotional because it was like, okay, not the whole why God, but it was more of why kill this dream? There could have been many others that you could have killed of, hey, y'all don't need to have a campus, or hey, y'all don't need to be in this financial position, but to kill the relationship that was building to show folks that you can have a healthy platonic relationship between a man and a woman and they both be respectively successful in what they're doing and lead a church, to me was tremendous and was a vision that I just had. So just seeing the vision die was probably more impactful. I think the smaller piece could be just relating to her and having someone that I could leverage in a way to help understand women better was also good. But at the same token, like I have you, she's good, but I tell you all the time now, it's like you're one of the greatest sharpeners. So I appreciate how Pastor Yvette could have showed up, and I appreciate the woman that she is. God gave me both of you all, so I could use you all both equally to achieve the ideas, the ways to relate, and not feel like I'm lacking in any way. Like the only place that I would say I'm lacking, if I was to say that, is not to be able to relate as a son to a mother, like what I hear my friends talk about. It's cool, but there's the other side. Like, mom is this, that, and the third. For me, I don't know how that would be. And that's probably more intriguing of how would I be mothered in this season of life. And I've shared with Naj behind the scenes, I don't know if my mom would be opinionated in this season. And I've told Naj, I don't do opinionated people. Like that's something that's a peeve of mine. I know how to navigate with and around them, but I know that's a peeve of mine. And so if mom was opinionated, it truly would impact our relationship, but it wouldn't mean that I would stop loving her. It'd just be like, all right, you got to chill out a little bit. I think I got this.
It's interesting. He doesn't do opinionated people, yet he's married to me. And if you know me, I've got opinions. I've got a plenty of them for you. But Pastor Yvette was truly a boss in every single sense of the word. And her death shocked and rocked all of us. Still to this day, I say, how did this happen? So managing your emotions, because like I said, I saw it when Pastor Yvette passed away, and I've seen you, everyone has negative emotions, right? The key is how we manage. How do we make space for them? How do we get rid of them? All the things. How do you manage negative emotions?
So the way I manage negative emotions is I find good outlets. One of the things that I had the opportunity to do is, as a pastor, you get a chance to preach. And one of the things that I challenge the congregation on is a word called chat. And that's an acronym that I apply to my own life of C, being creative. In order to get out of the problem or the negative emotion that you're in, sometimes it requires creativity. And it requires you to now think differently about what you're facing, because sometimes we think that this problem is something that's going to be lingering or chronic in our lives. And it's not that. It's just an episodic moment that God is trying to wake us up to something. And so for me, when I get into my creative space, I'm now able to look at this problem from a different vantage point, or I'm able to be creative to find an outlet of, hey, do I need to get into puzzles? Because now I'm in a season where if I'm dealing with a problem, puzzles help me to think or use a different part of my mind so I can start to think about my problems differently. The H is, how can I help another person? Like when I'm looking at my situation, one of the things that stands out to me was the mission trip that I did for Kenya, and being able to see individuals who lacked more than I did, even as a kid, still be so generous, still be so kind, still be so warm. It doesn't make sense. Like it's one of those, I literally saw the scripture come to life in my visit to Kenya, where it was like, you have the peace that surpasses all understanding. Like for me to see people in very trying situations still be smiling, positive, and wanting to give literally everything. Like when I say shirt off their back, I have a hoodie in my closet now from an individual that as we were leaving was like, hey, you complimented me on this. I want you to have it. Like it just helping others to me is that. The next is adventure. Like looking at how can I now get into a space or a place where it's now fun, because your negative emotions are trying to pull you down. How can you get out? Adventure lifts you. It changes your mind, your perspective, even your inner workings, like your hormones start to fire in a different way when things become adventurous. And then the T is traveling into your solitude. Like, how can you get to a space and place where it is a refuge for you? Sometimes it's with your spouse, sometimes it's alone. It just depends on what you need in that moment. But traveling to that space and that place gives you an opportunity to be able to say, you know what? It's now me and hopefully God that can now navigate the situation. And so I find that when I get into any one of those four bags, I'm now able to get past those emotions and have a different perspective than the one that looms over me like a cloud would.
You're an adventure seeker, and I am not. I want to stay on the ground and in the boat, whereas you're scuba diving and jumping out of airplanes, all of the things. So you talked about one of your pet peeves, and you have so much going on. Like you're bivocational, you got I don't know how many people reporting to you, then people reporting under them, and so on. What are some other pet peeves that you have? And what are some pet peeves you have in marriage? What do I do that gets on your nerves?
Pet peeves for me, number one is going to be organization. And I get on myself about this. And one of the things that I had to do was recently, like, just straighten up my office. It was a mess because I knew that the house was being renovated. But it irked me to no end to come into a space where it's just junky and messy. So for me, if I walk into a space and I just see stuff on the floor, it's a pet peeve. And you know this about me. One of the pet peeves in particular are shoes in a place that I
Hmm.
regularly have to go to. Like that, if you want to get on my ever loving nerves, just leave shoes in a place that so for example, if I'm coming into the house and there are shoes left right in the entryway where the door opens, oh, that's going to send me up the wall. So that is a pet peeve of just disorganization. And that trickles into a lot because I usually listen in meetings with a different ear, especially for the ones that I'm not leading. So if I'm overhearing a meeting that Naj might be in or listening into a meeting that we might have to do for the school, I could be very agitated depending on how the meeting is being conducted. Because I hate when people get on and they try to solution in the moment when you should be cascading information and trying to come up with the solution later. Organization is probably one of those things that if you want to see the best or me not at my best, bring me into some disorganization. But at the same time, what's funny is God puts me into that all the time. And I found that in every challenging situation, it's been nothing but chaos, but that's forged me to be a much better leader, a much better husband, a much better son, much better father, just going through those stormy, disorganizational situations. So that's my TED talk.
And so my pet peeve is I'm sure you may know, is at my big grown age, I cannot tolerate people who do not have open, honest, humble communication about whatever it is. Because to me, it's saying you don't care. You don't care to tell me the truth, to take a moment to have the conversation. If I care about you, I am going to have the conversation, whether it's a hard conversation or not. If I can't come to your event, I'm going to hit you up and say, hey, I can't come to your event. If I can't come down for Thanksgiving, I'm going to say I can't come down for Thanksgiving. I'm going to tell you before you come to me and say anything about it. If it looks like you're off today, you haven't said hello or whatever the case is, I'm going to come to you and pull you to the side and say, hey, you haven't said hello. What's going on? And I need the space to say those things. So to me, and also I can't deal with you got a problem with me, you tell everybody except for me. All of it just simply boils down to communication. And I realized how serious that is for me because that is when my toxic behavior comes out, right? I will cut you off. And it's not the right thing to do. I get it. But for some reason, that drives me crazy. And I think it's because to me, maybe it's tapping into me not feeling unseen or unheard or whatever. But it is just at this stage in my life, I don't want to guess anyone's feelings. I don't have time to guess. And in my head, I feel like if you love someone, you can have the communication, right?
Can I speak to that?
You can speak to that.
The reason I want to speak to that is that felt like pretty pointed. I don't know if I'm guilty of that.
No, not you. You're a good communicator.
Right. So the reason why I wanted to speak to it is what you're asking is sometimes above what people can do, right? So the famous quote, it's above me now.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are situations that are just above people now. And I think that's a realization that you just have to come to. And here's the challenge, right? On the other side of it is, how can I posture myself to be able to handle a ghosting situation? Or how do I posture myself to be able to have a difficult conversation and be willing to sacrifice the relationship, right? Because that's the other part of it. You don't know when you bring up an uncomfortability moment for yourself, how that can impact the relationship, right? It goes back to the pouring and the pushing. Is that person emotionally mature enough to be able to have that conversation? Even when you have it, or if you do have the conversation, no, when there's friction, pieces come off. That's just normal. Like when weird nerd thing about me, right? If you're trying to create a sharpened knife, sparks are going to fly. The sparks that are coming off of that knife are pieces of the knife. So you have to understand that when those sparks come off, that could be a relationship that's coming off. It doesn't mean that the knife lost anything. It means the knife got sharper to do what it's meant to do. And in that same situation, you have to say, when these sparks come off, am I willing to let the relationship go as it relates to my sharpness? And that's part of it. I need to understand that I might be frustrated that I've lost pieces of myself, but the sparks were only there because I was dull in the moment. Am I willing to become sharper? And can I sacrifice this to go through this challenging situation? Because you don't just put it in the sharpener, just let me inch it through and then it's now sharp. Like, it takes time to go through it. So I think overall, just hearing your side of it, and again, I know it wasn't pointed at me, but I just wanted to speak to just someone who might be listening that's, hey, I can relate with Naj and exactly what she's saying. I am a sharp person. And in order to get sharper, conflict has to be a part of it. And am I really in a space where I can lose relationships and be okay? If you're not, then you have to think of, how do I now navigate this normal in the relationships that I have? Maybe my relationships need to stay superficial because I'm afraid to lose people. Cool. You have to come to that reality, though.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. And I think that's, for me, is I'm learning. I'm not, like the saying says, I'm not for everybody, because I need that. I need open, honest communication. And I have realized, even when I'm telling, the kids, I'm always encouraging them when they say, oh, someone didn't say hello to me today, or we're not talking. I'm like, have a conversation. You got to become comfortable with having the hard conversations. And a big part of that is being comfortable in your own skin. But also with that, I tell them now, the flip side of that, everybody ain't like that. And some people, it's traumatizing almost when you come to them with the hard conversations. And for me, I'm at the place where I rather lose you, but I can't deny who a big part of myself, and a part of how I'm wired is I operate in honesty. I operate in vulnerability. Those are my values, right? And I'm not willing to sacrifice my values just for the comfort of this relationship. Now, as you always refer to me as, I'm the sharpener, right? I get that everybody don't like that, and I get that everybody ain't ready for that. And I've learned to be okay when people are like, when people walk away from me because they've come in contact with the sharpener. And again, if when you come across somebody that's a sharpener, y'all, if you miss the lesson, it's gonna come back again. Okay. So the best thing to do when you come across somebody that is challenging you in ways that you've never been challenged, get quiet and ask God, what is it that you need me to learn? What is it that you need me to see in this moment? And help me to go to this person. See, because that's where you're going to grow. This is a growth moment, and we've got to embrace it as such. So, final few questions.
Okay. Rapid fire style, or we got open-ended?
Open-ended, because we're getting even more deeper. Marriage stuff. We're on marriage, and we're talking about marriage. Love and respect. So, y'all, I've learned being married to this man that men equate love with respect. True? Is that true? Oh, okay. Hold on.
Got you. I'll go with that because
Say what you mean.
No, because to me the quote sounds antiquated, right? I do think respect is high on a man's need list. I think respect is very high on it. For me personally, I've come into a space where peace is priority. Like, I'd love peace more than anything. And I couldn't imagine having respect, but my peace being compromised regularly. Like that because to me, I don't have a safe space. And for me, having a safe space means that I have a place of peace. And so I understand that respect could be a part of it. But for me, I feel like respect has a arrogance to it. Like you owe me this. And I don't want to come from that space like you owe me respect. Like I think that's something to me, you can have that expectation, but it's earned. Again, you got to be able to understand, like, have I modeled that before you? And even to go into marriage a little bit, when we were going through our rough patch, one of the things that I was insisting on was even if I don't see the things that I want, I am going to model the things that you want and the things that I want from you. So when you were like, hey, I don't need you justifying, you know what? Don't say less. I won't be justifying anymore. I'll own those moments. If I don't communicate my frustrations and there's a heated moment, I'm not going to bring it up. I had the opportunity to do so. For me, I just wanted peace in the house, and I wanted the tone and the way you approached it to match that. Now, the respect was I hear it and I understand it, but at the core of it was really I want to be able to come home and feel comfortable in the home that I'm in, the space that I'm at. Like if I'm just being nerdy and crazy, cool, let me be crazy and nerdy on my own, but don't disrupt my peace because that's giving me joy in that moment. So to me, I appreciate the respect. It just, when I hear it, it just sounds antiquated overall.
I get it. I get it. So I want to mention something in our recent book. We wrote a book together, y'all, for those who don't know. It's The Black Family's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds. And we talk about this and a whole bunch of other deep stuff. But one of the things you said was that for men, and you were talking about that peace point, for men, peace, men are going to go and dwell wherever peace is. If that means their basement, if that means wherever they're playing video games, if it means the barber shop, if it means the strip club, wherever they find peace, that's where they're going to go. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you stole my thunder. I'm really not sure what else to add to that, but I'll say this to that same point. What folks should take notice of is, and again, this is just looking at the patterns of the person that you relate to. So it could be your husband, it could be your kids, it could be your significant other. You want to look at and challenge unhealthy behaviors, right? So one of the things that I think we got into it over a lot when we were early in our marriage was the times that I was spending on video games. And for my wife, she just saw it as like, you're wasting time, right? But for me, it was after stressing of how do we make ends meet, of stressing, am I going to get to work on time? Stressing, like, how are we going to pay the bills? My escape was coming home to be able to say, for 20 minutes, I'm not smoking, I'm not drinking, I'm not trying to chase another woman. I'm zoned into this video game that takes my mind off of everything. So for me, it was a place of relaxation, but it became a point of contention because I didn't explain to her what that was. And I think for me, I did a disservice to myself of not articulating. But again, this is a early 20-some-odd-year-old who doesn't have the language or vocabulary to express what's going on in a way that she could hear it. And if we were in this stage of life now, it's moved into workouts. She might be like, why are you in the basement? And I can now articulate, hey, it's just a moment in between calls or emails where I get to zone out on a TV show, or I get to work out so I can feel better about how I look, or just to get out some stress that I might be feeling. So for me, it's just taking time to understand your partner, but ask the probing questions. Don't assume negative intent on where they're spending your time unless it's unhealthy or immoral. That's what you need to challenge it.
And I will say, y'all, he even changed my perspective on video games with my son, because my son, as soon as he comes home, he runs to video games. And I'm like, you should be doing your homework. He's like, give him a chance. He's been in school all day, and give him a chance to just decompress and relax. This is helping him unwind. And it, as you said, it's not necessarily unhealthy. You know what I mean? It's not like he's doing some other things that he could be doing, but he's just on his game with his friends, just chillaxing. So that definitely helped change my perspective on that. And I know my son is happy about that as well. And I think for women, safety, love is safety for us. And safety means it's tied to so many different things, right? It could be feeling safe, physically safe, right? It could mean safe, financially safe and secure. It could also mean safety with my heart and emotions and so on. But I do recognize that women, in my talks with women and as I'm counseling and guiding women and so on, when people reach out to me for advice, safety, and especially when it's dealing with the opposite sex, safety is tied into that. What would you say, as you counsel a lot of couples, Pastor Shimon, what would you think is one of the number one causes of chaos in marriages?
It is the lack of empathy and the insistence on not to compromise. And here's where I think marriages can be transformed, or just relationships, because not everybody sees marriage as the end all be all. But if you are unable to articulate that you can understand as best as possible with the person that you're spending time with, that you can relate to what they're going through. You may not condone it, you may not agree, but at least you can see it from their vantage point. That is a major win, because as I've shared with Naj many times, people want to be seen and people want to be heard.
Mhm.
So if you can at least relate to them on, I see you, I hear you, and I still respectfully disagree, keep that as the vantage point, right? That you can still relate to someone, but not try to escalate. Your goal is to try to defuse. And that's the second piece where I talk about the compromise of, hey, we may want to go and do this, but can we do that? Like one of the situations that we had, if you don't mind me sharing, there was a family trip to a camp situation. And I think,
Camping.
yes, there was a camping situation. And for both of us, we felt very strongly, like nothing immoral, nothing negative, but we felt strongly about where to go. And one of the things that I know I didn't handle is I didn't articulate the importance of why I went to my destination versus the camping. I only heard it was this or this. And for me, I was like, no, potentially we could do both. But one of the things that I really took away from the heart of it was my wife actually wanted a family moment, like a pure family moment. And if I would have said, hey, we're going to go do this as a family, it would have easily removed all of the animosity that we had in that situation. But again, I didn't know the value system that was applied to it. Like for me, the conflict now illuminated, revealed to me that the value system is the family moment. So whether we're camping in Jablip or we're riding over to this remote place to go see friends, like the value is family. Like to me, it's not the experience, but it's who I'm doing the experience with. So that was a teachable moment to understand, like, hey, we could have compromised in that moment, but I think we were both so insistent on, I would prefer my way versus how do we go in a way.
That's dope. That's dope. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you on empathy. You have to be able to see things from that other person's vantage point and really empathize with them and understand and be willing to come to a compromise. And again, in our first years of marriage, I brought in all the toxic learned behavior. I was stonewall for days at a time and cuss him out and all that, because that's what I saw when my mom and my stepdad were divorcing. And so I thought that was just what you did. And it took, when you sat me down, you was like, I don't roll like that. And so that's when I realized, in order, I got to change. I have to change me, and I have to empathize with you. Like I have to see, how would it feel for you who didn't come from that kind of background? And here's this short 5'2" woman just spewing off a whole bunch of hatred. That's not cool. That's not helpful. That's not healthy. And that's hurting a person. And I also believe we say Corinthians 13 at weddings. That's everybody's scripture, right?
First Corinthians 13.
1 Corinthians 13. Thank you, Pastor. The great Bell Hooks, late great Bell Hooks, and I mentioned this in the Black Girl's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds, the book. She said, one of the issues in relationships is that we do not have a shared definition of love. And I think that I know that is where 1 Corinthians 13 comes into play. And I think if we really internalize that definition as much as we spew it out at weddings, I've been to so many weddings, and you can set your watch to it. Here we come, 1 Corinthians 13. But then later, it's like, what happened to that? You had it read at your wedding, your niece read it, the pastor quoted it. What happened to that 2 years from now? And I'm saying all that to say, if we really understood 1 Corinthians 13, love is kind, love is gentle, love is not boastful, it believes all things, hopes all things, our marriages and our relationships would be so much better across the board, right? And that's what I had to do. It was a big part of my healing, was really understanding what love means. And I read that thing like it was water. That's how much I chewed on it, because I really needed to understand how to love the person that's closest to me. That's you. And I wanted to be a loving mother to my children. At the end of the day, I want my children to be able to look back and say, my mom was a loving mother. One of the things, several things I want them to say, but that's one of them. And so what did that look like? And so I had to go to, as my grandparents used to say, the good book, and really look into that and see. So I say to any couple that's struggling, y'all look at 1 Corinthians 13, whether you love the Bible or not, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a Bible believer or not. 1 Corinthians 13 will change your life. If both of y'all get that and be on the same page with that, talk about what each component means, it will definitely change who you are and how y'all show up for each other. All right, any last few thoughts you want to share with folks?
Just a couple come to mind. One is just thinking about the demographics that'll hear this, right? One of the things that came to mind is, how do I, as a person, empathize to another person in a situation that I have no frame of reference or no experience in? So, for example, one that comes to mind is, how can I relate or empathize with a child or a fellow person who might have lost a parent and I've never experienced that before, right? The best way to approach a situation like that is to ask the person what they need in that moment. Too many times we go in with the assumption that I need to say this right word, or I need to do this right thing in order to pull them out of their funk. A lot of times we underestimate the ministry of presence. Just being there with a person could be all the world to them in that moment, because people remember when you were there, but they also remember even more the words that you spoke to them. So you want to be careful with the words that you give them in those moments, especially when you don't have the right thing to say. So for me, it's just being able to master that ministry of presence helps get you on the right path to empathizing. And then secondarily, I just want to say, for all of those folks in other demographic groups, as Naj laid out from Love, it's what tools do I need to add into my toolbox? So for me, I'm not only just thinking, hey, I've arrived into these situations. It's, what situations have I failed at, so that way I don't make that same mistake twice. I am a huge believer, don't take the same test twice. I put all of the work in so I don't have to take that same test over and over again. For folks, it might be an opportunity to be like, hey, did I relate to my boss in the right way? Did I relate to my kids in the right way? Did I relate to my friend in the right way? Did I relate to an enemy in the right way? Because you still got to do that too. I need to be able to build the right tools into my tool set so that way I can navigate any relationship, because the goal is always to remember that at the end of the words, the thoughts, the strategies that you put into place, there's going to be a human that it touches. So you want to make sure that it leaves a positive impact on every human that it touches. That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Shout out to my special guest, the one, the only, Pastor Shaman, husband, father, author, all the things, program director, business owner, all the things he is, y'all. Thank you for joining us. The Black Girl's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds. Check us out on the site by the same name. Check us out on IG. You can find me at Najma Smalls in real life. You can also find me at The Black Girl's Guide to Healing. And Shaman is somewhere out there as well. What's your IG, Shaman?
Yep, it's at Shaman Smalls. I am going to do better, or I'm at least try to do better in 2025 with social media.
Yes.
I just don't spend that time there.
Yeah. We'll get them up there, y'all. Thank you. Have a good night.